Within the dense woodlands of Brandenburg lies a sprawling complex of decaying grandeur that nature has slowly begun to reclaim for itself. The trees twist their gnarled roots through the shattered windows, and the moss carpets the rotting floorboards of what was once the most ambitious hospital complex in Germany. This is Beelitz Heilstaetten, and its crumbling facade hides a century of pain and suffering that refuses to stay buried in the past. The wind that whistles through the empty corridors carries with it the phantom echoes of coughing patients and the screams of wounded soldiers. Visitors who dare to step past the rusted gates often report an overwhelming sensation of heaviness in the air, as if the very atmosphere is pressing down on them with the weight of 1,000 dead souls. The story of this ominous place began in the late 19th century, when the Industrial Revolution brought with it a terrifying plague known as tuberculosis or consumption. The air in Berlin had become thick with coal smoke and disease, forcing the Health Insurance Corporation of the city to seek a solution in the fresh air of the countryside. They selected a vast tract of forest land to construct a sanatorium that would be a masterpiece of architecture and medical technology. It was designed to be a self-contained city with its own power plant and butcher shop and bakery and laundry facilities, ensuring that the patients and staff never needed to leave the grounds. The complex was divided strictly by gender and disease progression, creating a rigid system of isolation that would set the tone for the dark history to follow. The architecture itself was beautiful, yet imposing, with ornate balconies and high ceilings that were intended to provide the tuberculosis patients with as much sunlight and fresh air as possible. Patients would spend hours lying on these balconies in their beds, wrapped in blankets, while breathing in the cold forest air, which was the only known treatment at the time. However, despite the peaceful surroundings, the reality of the sanatorium was grim, and death was a daily occurrence. The White Plague consumed the lungs of the young and old alike, leaving them gasping for breath until their bodies finally gave out. The morgue was constantly busy, and the sight of hearses leaving the complex became a mundane part of daily life for those who were trapped within the sanatorium walls. When the First World War erupted across Europe, the purpose of Beelitz Heilstaetten shifted dramatically from a place of healing for the sick to a military hospital for the war wounded. The peaceful silence of the forest was replaced by the arrival of hospital trains carrying thousands of soldiers whose bodies had been torn apart by machine gun fire and artillery shells. The sanatorium became a house of horrors where surgeons worked around the clock to amputate shattered limbs and stitch up gaping wounds. The screams of men in agony echoed through the halls day and night, creating a reservoir of pain that sensitive individuals claim can still be felt today. It was during this time that the hospital hosted its most infamous patient. In the autumn of 1916, a young corporal named Adolf Hitler was brought to Beelitz Heilstätten to recover from a leg wound he sustained during the Battle of the Somme. He spent nearly 2 months recuperating in these very halls, brooding over the humiliating state of the German war effort. Historians and paranormal investigators alike have speculated that the dark energy of the place may have influenced his already twisted psyche. The room where he stayed remains a point of morbid fascination for dark tourists. Although the hospital administration has long since removed any plaques or markers, the fact that such a figure once walked these corridors adds a layer of historical malevolence to the already eerie atmosphere. Following the devastation of the Great War, the hospital struggled through the economic ruin of the Weimar Republic before being plunged once again into the darkness of global conflict. During the Second World War, the complex served as a military hospital for the Third Reich, treating wounded Nazi soldiers and SS officers. The suffering during this period was compounded by the looming threat of Allied bombing raids, which reduced the surrounding city of Berlin to rubble, while the hospital itself largely escaped direct destruction. The fear and desperation of the staff and patients were palpable. Rumors persist that the facility was also used for darker medical experiments, in line with the horrific practices of the Nazi regime. Though many records were destroyed before the war ended, the final days of the Second World War brought a wave of violence to Beelitz Heilstätten. As the Red Army advanced relentlessly toward Berlin, the hospital became a chaotic battleground where desperate German defenders made their last stand against the overwhelming Soviet forces. Eyewitness accounts from the time describe scenes of absolute carnage, with fighting taking place in the wards and corridors. Nurses and doctors were caught in the crossfire, and many were brutalized or killed by the invading troops. The blood spilled during those final weeks soaked into the floorboards, leaving a stain on the spiritual fabric of the building that no amount of time could ever wash away. After the war, the complex fell under Soviet control and was transformed into the largest military hospital outside of the Soviet Union. For decades, it remained a forbidden zone, strictly off limits to the German public, and shrouded in secrecy. High-ranking Soviet officials and soldiers were treated here, and the hospital became a bubble of Russian life in the middle of East Germany. The secrecy surrounding the site during the Cold War fueled countless rumors about what was really happening behind the walls. Locals whispered about strange lights seen at night and unexplained disappearances. But the fear of the Soviet military kept anyone from asking too many questions. It was during the Soviet era that one of the most disturbing legends of Beelitz Heilstätten was born, involving a serial killer as the Beast of Beelitz. Wolfgang Schmidt was a deeply disturbed individual who roamed the forests surrounding the hospital, preying on women and children. His brutal crimes sent a wave of terror through the region. And although he did not operate exclusively within the hospital grounds, his presence added to the aura of danger that surrounded the area. The proximity of such pure human evil to a place already saturated with death seemed to amplify the negative energy, making the forest itself feel hostile to anyone who dared to enter. In one horrific incident that is often conflated with the ghost stories of the hospital, a young mother, who was the wife of a Soviet doctor, was murdered along with her infant child in the nearby woods. The sheer brutality of the crime shocked even the hardened military personnel, and it is said that their restless spirits still wander the perimeter of the hospital grounds. Visitors have reported hearing the phantom cries of a baby and the weeping of a woman near the old officers' quarters. These sounds are often accompanied by a sudden drop in temperature and a feeling of immense sorrow that can bring grown men to tears. The most famous political resident of the hospital during the Cold War era was Erich Honecker, the deposed leader of East Germany. In the winter of 1990, he fled to Beelitz-Heilstätten to seek refuge under the protection of the Soviet military. While battling liver cancer, he and his wife occupied the doctor's house, while the German government demanded his extradition. His presence turned the decaying hospital into the center of a geopolitical standoff. The fact that a dictator sought sanctuary in this place of death seems fitting to many who believe that the hospital attracts dark souls. When the Soviet military finally withdrew from Germany in 1994, they left Beelitz Heilstätten completely abandoned. They stripped the buildings of anything valuable, but left behind heavy medical equipment and patient files, and even jars containing preserved organs. The sudden vacuum of human life allowed the natural decay to accelerate rapidly. Without maintenance, the roofs began to leak, and the plaster crumbled from the walls. The hospital became a ghost town, a massive rotting monument to the 20th century that attracted vandals and copper thieves and urban explorers who were drawn to its morbid beauty. It was in this state of abandonment that the true hauntings began to manifest with terrifying frequency. Urban explorers who broke into the surgery building reported seeing shadow figures darting between the rusted operating tables. The heavy surgical lights, which had been disconnected from power for decades, would reportedly swing on their own, as if pushed by an invisible hand. Some photographers captured images of inexplicable mists and orbs hovering over the patient beds. The atmosphere in the surgery building is often described as aggressive, with visitors feeling a strong urge to leave immediately. One of the most active hotspots for paranormal activity is the old bathhouse, where patients once bathed in large communal tubs. The tiled walls create an echo chamber that amplifies every sound, and many visitors have reported hearing disembodied voices and footsteps splashing in non-existent water. A recurring apparition seen here is that of a woman in an old-fashioned nurse uniform who stands silently at the end of the corridor before vanishing into a wall. Some believe she is a spectral guardian watching over the ruins, while others feel a more malevolent intent radiating from her motionless form. The Whitney Houston house, named sarcastically by locals due to a graffiti tag, has been the site of numerous tragic accidents that border on the supernatural. Several young explorers have fallen to their deaths from the upper floors or through weakened roof sections. While these can be attributed to the dangerous state of the building, paranormal investigators suggest that something dark influences visitors to take reckless risks. Survivors of near misses often describe a sudden wave of dizziness or a compulsion to step closer to the edge just before they slipped. This suggests a predatory entity that feeds on the life force of the living. In 2008, the hospital was the scene of a brutal murder that seemed to echo the violence of the past. A photographer lured a young model to the ruins for a photo shoot, only to beat her to death in a fit of rage. This tragic event reinforced the reputation of Beelitz Heilstätten as a magnet for violence and death. The negative energy accumulated over a century seems to infect those with weak minds, driving them to commit unspeakable acts. The murder site has since become a focal point for dark energy, where visitors frequently report feeling nauseous and terrified. Ghost hunters who have conducted investigations in the psychiatric ward of the complex have captured chilling electronic voice phenomena, or EVP recordings. These recordings often contain guttural growls or whispers in German and Russian. One particularly famous recording captures a voice pleading for water, while another commands the investigators to get out. The sheer number of distinct voices recorded suggests that the hospital is a crowded vessel of trapped spirits, unable to move on from the trauma they suffered in life. The mixture of languages reflects the diverse and tragic history of the occupants. A particularly terrifying encounter was reported by a group of teenagers who broke into the women's ward late one night. They claimed to have walked into a room where the temperature instantly dropped to freezing despite it being a warm summer night. Their flashlights began to flicker in unison, and they heard the distinct sound of a metal bed frame being dragged across the floor above them. When they looked up, they realized the ceiling had collapsed years ago, and there was no floor above them, only the open sky. The realization that the sound was impossible sent them fleeing into the woods in a blind panic. The heating plant which once provided warmth to the entire complex, is a towering cathedral of rust and industrial machinery. It is here that workers and security guards have reported seeing a tall shadow figure with glowing red eyes lurking in the catwalks. This entity is described as being much larger than a human and radiating a sense of pure malice. Some believe this could be a demonic entity attracted to the suffering of the location, rather than the ghost of a former human. The oppressive atmosphere in the plant is so intense that many seasoned explorers refuse to enter it alone. Another recurring phenomenon is the smell of antiseptic and rotting flesh that manifests without a source. Visitors walking through the empty corridors will suddenly be hit by the overpowering scent of old hospital disinfectant mixed with the copper tang of blood. This olfactory hallucination usually lasts for only a few seconds, but it is visceral and sickening. It serves as a sensory flashback to the times when these halls were filled with the wounded and the dying, transporting the witness back to the darkest days of the hospital. The extensive tunnel system that connects the various buildings is perhaps the most frightening part of Beelitz Heilstätten. These subterranean passages were used to transport bodies and supplies out of sight of the patients. They are pitch black and flooded with stagnant water, making them treacherous to navigate. Those who have ventured down there report feeling hands grabbing at their ankles and hearing whispers directly in their ears. The tunnels are believed to be the arteries of the haunting, channeling the dark energy throughout the entire complex. In recent years, a canopy walk was constructed above the ruins, allowing tourists to view the site safely from above. However, even from this safe distance, visitors report strange occurrences. Many have looked down into the shattered windows of the Alpenhaus building and seen faces peering back at them from the darkness. Photographs taken from the walkway often reveal anomalies and figures standing in rooms that are physically inaccessible due to collapsed floors. It seems that the spirits are aware they are being watched and are now looking back at the living. There is a specific room in the administrative building where a grand piano once stood rotting for years. Before it was removed, visitors claimed they could hear faint, discordant notes being played. As they approached the room, the music was described as sad and disjointed sounding, like a child trying to remember a song. Legend says that a young patient who loved music died in that room and continues to play for an audience that is no longer there. The sorrowful melody is a stark contrast to the violent energy found elsewhere in the complex. The isolation of the sanatorium meant that many patients died without their families present. This loneliness permeates the site, creating a deep sense of melancholy that affects everyone who visits. Psychics who have visited Beelitz describe a sea of lost souls wandering the grounds, looking for their loved ones. They claim that the emotional imprint of the isolation is just as strong as the physical decay. This emotional residue can cause sudden mood swings in visitors, with some breaking down, weeping for no apparent reason. The sheer size of the complex means that there are huge sections that have not been entered by humans in decades. In these forgotten corners, nature and the supernatural have fused together. Vines act as conduits for spectral energy, and the trees that grow through the roofs seem to stand guard over the secrets within. There are rumors of hidden basements and sealed rooms that contain relics from the Nazi era, still waiting to be discovered. The mystery of what lies in the unexplored sections adds to the dread. One urban explorer recounted a harrowing tale of being locked in a room on the 3rd floor. The door, which had no lock and was jammed open by debris, suddenly slammed shut with tremendous force. For 10 minutes, he pounded on the door and screamed for help, while the sound of heavy breathing filled the small room. Just as he was about to break the window, to jump, the door clicked and swung open on its own. He fled the building and never returned, convinced that something had been toying with him. Security guards who patrol the perimeter at night with dogs report that the animals often refuse to enter certain areas. The dogs will whimper and tuck their tails or bark aggressively at empty space. Animals are known to be more sensitive to the paranormal, and their reaction confirms that there is something wrong with the land itself. The guards often speak of seeing lights turning on in buildings that have been disconnected from the grid for 30 years. The convergence of history and tragedy at Beelitz Heilstaetten creates a unique type of haunting. It is not just a single ghost or a single event, but a layering of trauma over a century, from the TB patients to the war wounded to the victims of murder. The site is a repository of human suffering. This accumulation of negative energy has created a vortex that seems to distort reality for those who enter. Time feels different inside the walls, and the boundary between the living and the dead feels dangerously thin. As you stand before the looming silhouette of the surgery building, with the wind rustling the dead leaves around your feet, you cannot help but feel like an intruder. The broken windows look like hollow eyes, staring judgmentally at the living. You realize that the true owners of this place are not the investors or the state, but the entities that inhabit the shadows. The silence is not empty, it is waiting. It waits for the sun to go down, so the real activity can begin. Leaving Beelitz Heilstaetten is often described as waking up from a nightmare. As you cross the threshold back into the safety of the modern world, the heavy feeling in your chest lifts. But for many, the experience does not end there. The images of the rotting halls and the feeling of being watched follow them home. They see shadows in the corners of their own bedrooms and hear the phantom coughs in the silence of the night. The hospital may be abandoned, but it never truly lets you go.